Okay. Thank you all for joining once again. Second 2 Wednesdays in a row. Let me just say that we'd like to dedicate this shir this evening Le'ilui Nishmas Rabbi Yaakov Sholem ben Yaakov, Judith Levy's father, wish harichas yomim, and the shir should be Le'ilui Nishmosai. So I used to have this minhag. I would say it's a minhag, but I made it up, so I'm not sure it's actually really a minhag. That on the first night of Pesach before the Seder, over the years when I was in Hadley Wood, I used to get up and say, after davening, after Ma'ariv, I used to say words to the effect of, every other occasion, every other night of the year, everything else really, we try and say that shul, what we do in shul is like the focal point. It's the center. And that's where you take the inspiration, the messages from every other Yom Tov. You take everything from shul, and that will guide you and lead you and sort of hopefully direct you and provide you with inspiration, etc. And there's one time in the year when we don't do that. And that is on Seder night. On Seder night, we turn around to those who come to shul and those who don't. And we say, it's in your hands. You want to pass Yiddishkeit on? We want to have a future for our people? It's up to you. It's an incredibly empowering moment. The fact that the pinnacle, the highlight, the night, it is the night of the year in the entire philosophy of Yiddishkeit, we give it over to the Hamoin Am. We give it over to everyone, to the regular folk, and we say, guys, do your best, do the best you can. See if you can inspire to the best of your abilities. And the challenge, of course, is that every year is different, every Seder is different, every family is different, every circumstance is different, everything is different. But in a way, that is the beauty. Because I always used to say to people, you know your circumstances, you know your family situation, you know your setup, you know what will speak to people the best. So what we can try and do, I think, is think of some ideas that are particularly relevant to this year, because every year is different, and we certainly have thoughts this year reflecting on the year that has passed, ideas that perhaps are useful, things that we can share at the Seder, as well as perhaps some messages that are timeless, but that perhaps could be essential for people around the Seder table to hear. So I'm going to share with you some thoughts, some ideas, and please do feel free to make use and adapt in whatever way you think it might be useful in your personal situation and circumstances. So we begin, of course, with the name Seder. And the problem with the word Seder, as many note, is the fact that, firstly, we're not so great with order, Seder, as a people, right? You know, sometimes we can be considered to be a little bit out of order. You know, we've gone through a history where we've had to learn how to improvise. We've had to learn how to do things on the hoof. And particularly when we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, we talk about leaving Egypt, it's the opposite of order. It's the opposite of organization, everything about it, right? The notion of a nace, of a miracle, means that it's outside the natural world. That's what it is. It's outside the natural world. And therefore, when we're outside the natural order of things, we would think that the entire opposite of what we would do would be to suddenly try and force things into an order, into a Seder. And yet, going back to the time of the Rishonim, we know that is exactly what we do on Seder night. We have a particular order. It's very specific, goes back hundreds of years. I heard from Yechezkel Weinfeld Shlita in Yerushalayim that the whole point, the whole idea here is to make some sort of Seder, some sort of order out of what appears to be extraordinary, so that it lasts. The point is that it shouldn't just be an emotional high. It should have a lasting effect on us all. In other words, the challenge is, what lessons will we learn from the Seder this year? In what way will we take something which seems so extraordinary, a story that is completely out of the ordinary, and yet give it some framework, give it some order, give it a Seder so that it doesn't remain just an emotional high, but has a lasting effect on us. And that is why we call it a Seder and why we are so particular about the order itself, because our task is to provide order for what seems orderless, what doesn't seem to have any order to it. We need to find that order. We need to find that Seder. So here we are. a year on. A year on from last Pesach, when we were all in a situation of real shock. I'm sure I wasn't the only one, but sitting down at the Seder, that was the moment really for me when it sort of hit me what had actually happened since Purim. That was just how I felt. I sat down at the Seder, and that was the moment when it really hit me. Until then, I felt like we'd been going on sort of, autopilot. We deal with it, we work out, what do we do? How are we going to manage Pesach? We're going to be by ourselves, this, that, whatever. And then suddenly you sit down at the Seder. It's the first time you have to think. You have a chance to think. It reminds me of a story that a good friend of mine told me, who was during his working career, he was one of the top people at Deutsche Bank, and he happened to be in the United States on 9/11. And he was, because of the circumstances, when the planes crashed into the towers, he was basically the senior figure in Deutsche Bank in the United States. And they were in touch with the Federal Reserve just to keep the system, the country going that day. It was it was a crazy time. He remembers being one of the buildings where when the planes hit, they were literally sort of thrown, the windows blew out, they were thrown across the room. Their building thankfully wasn't damaged, I think, beyond that. And he said to me, and of course, you remember it was the beginning of Slichas. He managed to get back to England either before Rosh Hashanah or just between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And he said he was in Shul, Kol Nidre night, and that's when it hit him. And that's when it hit him what he had been through. That was the moment. He suddenly stopped. And I think that's how we felt last Pesach. We felt that this was this moment at the Seder, we suddenly think, wow. But here we are a year on. Now, the concept of a year is very prominent in the Seder. Because if you look at the very beginning, etc., etc., we focus on a year. And we double it. We say again, Hoshata Avdei, this year we are slaves, L'shana haba b'nei chor, and the next year we are free people. So you see, at the outset of the Seder, you have the notion of the year. You have the idea of a yearly cycle. Now the Maharal points out that what a year is the word year is a strange thing, because what does it mean? The word for a year really means the word itself is almost like a contradiction in terms, because shana, right, means both repetition. Yeah, so we say, for example, with the dreams, right, with Paro's dreams, yeah, va'al hishonos hachalom, on the doubling of the dream. So the dream is repeated because a year is a cycle. So you go into the next year and it repeats the year that's before. But at the same time, of course, it is a change as well. The word shana is also the word for shinui, means a change. So at the same time, it's something which repeats, and it's also something which changes. So I think what the notion of a year represents, the focus of a year at the beginning of the Seder in particular, is the question of how do we break the cycle? How do we ensure that it's not just a repetition of another year, but instead it's a year of change? How do we make that word shana become not just repetition, not just another year, but actually a focus for change? And the key seems to be the words before, because the words we say immediately before, this year we are slaves, next year may we be free, are the words kol dichvin yeseh v'yechol. We say holach mo'anya, this is the poor man's bread, the bread of affliction, and we say anyone who is hungry, let them come and eat. And the question is obvious, what's the connection? So we have, because holach ma'anya, because we had to eat, because we had to eat the matzah, therefore we're inviting everyone to eat. We can do chesed the rest of the year as well. I mean, what is the connection in particular? Why is it that we say holach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction, and therefore we say whoever is hungry, let them come and eat? And the answer I think we see in the concept of maschil, bignos, and Messiah Mishra. What underpins the whole Seder, the thread that goes through the whole thing, is the idea that we begin with gnus, we begin with how difficult things were. We're familiar with the debate as to whether that was spiritual or physical, Rav and Shmuel in the Gemara and Pesachim. We begin with the low points, Messiah B'Shvach, and we end with the high points. We end with the points of praise. But the Gemara in Pesachim tells us, Omar Rava, Kuf Tezayin on the base, Omar Rava, Tzorech Shayomar va'anachnu hoitzi misham. We have to say that we left, that Hashem took us out of Egypt. What is the idea that we say Hashem took us out of Egypt, as of course we say most famously through B'chol Dar V'Dar? We need to understand that the gnus, the maschil b'gnus, the beginning with the low point, the downside, is part and parcel of the shvach, of the praise. The real challenge, the real aim of Seder night is not to say we're telling a story from how bad things were at the beginning to how good they became at the end, but that without the period of gnus, without the down points, without that kor habarzel, the crucible that refined us as a people, we would never have arrived at the shvach. We never would have got there. We never would have got to the high point of leaving Egypt and receiving the Torah and everything else. And what is that shvach? What is that praise? What is the shvach of the gnus? What is the praise of the low points? How can we transform? What is it that we can say about the difficult periods that somehow they are positive as well? And the answer is that we will be forever defined as a result of our experience in Egypt as Rachmanim b'nei Rachmanim, as people who have mercy and have Rachmanos on those who need it the most. The Torah tells us, "V'ger lo silchatz," you shall not oppress a ger, "Ki yadatem etz nefesh hager, ki gerim heyisem be'eretz Mitzrayim." You were strangers. You know what it means. You understand what it means to be in a foreign place, to be in a foreign land. You understand es nefesh hager. It's not just that you understand and can relate. I feel sorry for you. I empathize with you. You know the nefesh hager. You know what it means to be a stranger. You understand. You lived through it. And that is why kol dichvin yeseh v'yechol, anyone who is hungry, let them come and eat, can only genuinely come from holach ma'anya. It's only because we lived that experience of holach ma'anya, that we had that bread of affliction, that we can understand what it means to say to someone, kol dichvin yeseh v'yechol, you're hungry, let them come and eat. That is the downside. That is the praise in the gnus. That is the shvach within the gnus. That's enabling us to see something positive that came out of our experience. And what's important to understand, and as the Maharal certainly understands it this way, is the two phrases here make it clear that we're not just talking about those who are materially impoverished. You know, that's the kol dichvin yeseh v'yechol. Anyone who is hungry, let them come and eat. But we don't just say that. We say kol ditzrich yeseh v'yifsach. What is called ditzrich? Says the Maharal, someone who may not be starving hungry, but they don't have everything they need. You know, the Gemara says that the Gemara talks about Oni ben Tovim, someone who is a poor person who came from a well-off family. And the Gemara tells us you need to provide for the level that he's used to, because that's their nefesh. That's part of what they are as a person, as a makeup. It's not good enough just to say, it's okay, they've got meals, they've got bread on the table. No, you've got to think about the nefesh, kol ditzrich, whoever needs, let them come and take part. That is an incredible sensitivity. That's the sensitivity that we develop here. And it is that which leads, I think, to the idea of the change. That we can say, Hashata Hocha, this year we are here, and next year, Lashana Hamav Neichorim. The next year we are free. What does that mean? That through that experience, through the experience of internalizing what it means to have gone through the experience in Egypt, from the down points to the high points, and seeing the positive even in the low points, that injects something different. That enables us to break the cycle of the year. That's what we're looking to do here. That's the 4-time mention of the word year right at the beginning of the Seder. Don't allow the year to be simply a repetition of the previous year. Let the year be something different. Let the year bring change. Now this year, we have all, whether we know it or don't know it, and it's some maybe to a lesser extent, and to others some a greater extent. This year, in some way, we've all grown, or certainly older, and in some ways, perhaps wiser. In many ways, we've experienced a year of immense change. This year, we sit down at the Seder, and this is whether it's personal or not. As I mentioned in the past, the powerful idea, mentioned in the Parsha Share last week, as the Gemara says, that luchos v'shivrei luchos munachim ba'aron, that both the luchos, the second set of tablets, and the broken pieces of the first set are together in the aron. That's what we do at the Seder this year. This year, we're taking those broken pieces with us. We are taking broken pieces of the past year to our Seder table, whether we know it or not. And again, it might be personal, might be less personal, but it's there. Everyone has those broken pieces. We are holding those broken pieces. But the challenge is, what can we do to somehow see the positive, the shvach in the gunah, somehow to see something that enables us to say, L'shana haba b'nei chor, in the next year we're free because we've changed. We've changed. We've taken something which was repetition, a year which repeated into something which is change. We understand that the nature of our experience in Mitzrayim was to view people differently, was to look at people and say, what do they need? What can I do for them? Kol ditzrich, whatever they need. That changes us for good. It changes us for the better. There's a powerful message, I think, linked to this year in particular in the Seder. This year, we're going to begin the Seder with Yak Nahaz, right? Yak Nahaz, Yain Kiddush, Ne'av Havdalah Zman. We're going to make Havdalah at the Seder. Now, you're going to tell me it's not such a big deal, right? Because we did it a couple of years ago. We do it Motzei Shabbos, when Pesach Shabbos Sunday. But I'd like to remind you that the only case we can make Havdalah at the Seder min ha-Torah, so to speak, not saying Havdalah is min ha-Torah, but the idea that the first Seder night you can make Havdalah, right, is this setup. Yeah, the only time in Eretz Yisrael, well, they'll say Yak Nahaz, they will make Havdalah at the Seder, is this year, when it goes straight from a Shabbos, obviously, right? Because there's only one Seder. So there must be, I think, something here, right? There must be something here that this year we're going to bring in the Seder with Havdalah. We know the Arba Kosos, the 4 cups, the 4 Geula, Shona Shel Geula, right? The 4 expressions of redemption. So what is the first one? The first expression, which connects to the first kos, is v'hoitzeisi, right? I took you out. It is the moment of Exodus itself. I took you out of Mitzrayim, the moment of Exodus, Yetzias Mitzrayim. But what's striking is that in the Havdalah from Shabbos to Yom Tov, which is a very, very beautiful, beautiful piece, very beautiful paragraph, we list 7 types of distinguishing, right? We make 7 distinctions, yeah? Look at that Havdalah, and what we say is, we make 7 different distinctions. Hamavda ben kodesh l'chol ben l'choshech ben yisrael amen ben yom shvil shishne ma'aseh ben kedusha shabbat kedusha yom tov v'vdalta v'es yom hashvim sheishis yom ma'aseh kidashta v'vdalta v'kidash am kedusha kedusha secha. And then we finish off mekar hamavda ben kodesh l'kodesh. Question is, there is one missing. What should be the most obvious of all, and particularly at Seder night. What is that? Ben avdus l'cheres. Hamavdal ben avdus, freedom and slavery. Why is that not there? Why is that Havdalah not there? We list all sorts of things, Yisrael, Amim, all these things. They're not particularly related to Havdalah. We struggle to understand why they're in there, okay? But the fact is why is that not there? That fundamental distinction between to be a free person and a person who's in slavery. Rav Kook, Zichron Levrocha, says that we have a difficulty in comprehending what slavery and freedom are. We struggle to understand both of them. Both slavery and freedom we struggle with. Because, and he says, this is what you learn as much from what's excluded from the list of distinctions from the Havdalah as you learn from what's included. Why is it difficult? Because to understand how to free ourselves really from slavery is immensely difficult. To understand how to really shake off the status of a slave, all those things that enslave us in life, is immensely difficult. In so many ways, we live life enslaved. And equally, he says, it's incredibly difficult to comprehend the idea of freedom, to commit ourselves to genuine freedom, a freedom that isn't a false freedom, that isn't really in slavery to something else instead of the slavery of Egypt, but a genuine freedom, a freedom to grow, to allow the neshama to soar. That is incredibly difficult too. So the reality is that when we look at the concepts of Avdus and Cheres, at first glance, it seems obvious. Yeah, slavery, freedom. That's not that. On the contrary, it's left out of the list because it's something very difficult. It's not like Or L'Choshech. It's not something we can see straight away, light and darkness. We ask ourselves, are we still slaves or are we truly free? And those distinctions are a lifetime's work. And those distinctions are our task to make. We have to make that distinction ourselves between Avdus and Cheres, between slavery and freedom. To say Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol, we thank Hashem. Hashem, you've made all these distinctions in the world. We didn't have to do anything. You created the difference in light and darkness. When it comes to slavery and freedom, we can't say that. Why? Of course, Hashem took us out of Egypt. But to really understand the difference, the distinction, to say Hamavdil ben Avdus L'cheres, no. You have to do that yourself. You can't turn around to Hashem and say, you made the distinction between slavery and freedom. No, we have to make that distinction. That's something we have to do through the way we lead our lives. That's why it's not included in the 7 Havdalahs. Yet the key as to how to achieve that, I think, is in the story of Havdalah itself. And when I say the story of Havdalah, I particularly mean the idea of why we say the bracha Borim Orei Ha'esh, which of course we still do on Yom Tov as well. We say Borim Orei Ha'esh. Tana Devei Yol tells Pirkei Rebbe Lezer, actually I think it's Pirkei Rebbe Lezer says that the story, part of the story we're familiar with, but the Pirkei Rebbe Lezer adds a little bit extra, which makes all the difference. We know that we say the bracha Borim Orei Ha'esh on Motzei Shabbos because that's when Adam HaRishon first discovered fire. So he lit the first fire, so he lit fire for the first time, and that's why we say the bracha on Motzei Shabbos Borim Orei Ha'esh. But the Medrash takes it a little bit further. Adam HaRishon has been thrown out of Gan Eden. He has left Gan Eden, right? His world has gone completely black. There is no light in the world. There's no light. It's all darkness. He's out. He's finished. Life is over. He thinks all the light is gone. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu grants him the intuition to create or from the choshech. It's the end. It's black. And all of a sudden there's light again. And that is the moment when Adam HaRishon realizes that actually not all is lost, that he does have the ability to rebuild against all odds. That is the message of Borim Orei Ha'esh. That is the Hamavdil ben Or LaChoshech. When we launch the Seder this year with Havdalah, I think that's going to be an incredibly powerful moment, and it's a teaching moment for people around the Seder, for those of you who are leading a Seder. Usually we just begin with Kiddush. Usually we say Kiddush. What is Kiddush? Kiddush is Geula, redemption. We shoot for the stars. We're going to sanctify our lives. Everything incredible. But after the past year, if we want to achieve real freedom through the Seder, I think we need the message this year of Havdalah as well. We need the message of being able to find Or from the Choshech, the message of Adam HaRishon and Motzei Shabbos, that we can find that light. We can find that light from the darkness, like Adam HaRishon did in Gan Eden, who was driven out and he's banished and everything seems lost. But then he produces light. He has all those broken luchos around him. He has all the shivrei luchos of his dreams of Gan Eden, and he was going to be l'avdol l'shamra. He was going to protect it. He was guarding it, and it's all that wonderful. And it's gone. It's dark. He's got the broken pieces of tablets with him, and suddenly he manages to create light. Recall the message of Eli Wiesel, which I think I mentioned before Rosh Hashanah this year, which is just as important today as it was then, when he was asked by a group what the greatest miracle of the story of, what was the greatest thing about the story of Adam and Chava, of Adam and Eve, what was the greatest thing about it? And he said, the greatest thing about the whole story was the fact that they could rebuild again from the outside. They could be Mikedem LeGan Eden. They were outside Gan Eden. If you recall, I said the idea of Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'noshuva, Chadesh Yomenu Kekedem, renew our days like as of old Kekedem. What's Kekedem? The Medrash says, Mikedem LeGan Eden. We're outside Gan Eden and we can still rebuild. That is the power. That is the potential that we have. That's the greatest miracle of all. This year, as the year turns, as it repeats itself, we go through another cycle. The message of Havdalah is that we can always change. We can always create light. We can always turn the year, the Shana, meaning repetition, into a catalyst for Shinui, for change. We can create light from the darkness. We can reach out, particularly to the Kol Dichvin. We can look at those people, Kol Ditzrich, what do people need? And ultimately, it is that which makes us Lashon Haba B'nei Chorin. When we live life in a way that allows us to change, we become Lashon Haba B'nei Chorin. That's what makes us really free. Because now we understand. We understand what it means to make a Havdalah Bein avdus lecheres. We've made that distinction ourselves between slavery and freedom. That is the power, I think, this year of beginning the Seder with Havdalah. And it leads us into the Holach Ma'anya, which has that renewed meaning this year. And I'd like to share with you 3 brief, distinct ideas that I think are very adaptable, usable, simple, straightforward, no lengthy deliberations, just brief snippets that you can share at your Seder, because I think they're incredibly important. Why do we say Metchila of the Avodah Zarah? Why do we say that at all? Why do we need to mention how awful things were with our ancestors, that they started off worshipping idols? Why do we have to dredge that up? Why? Let's start from Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu discovered Hashem. It's astonishing. We begin by saying they used to worship idols. Viktor Frankl, in his famous story of his life, and he writes and he describes his experiences. And it's a great teaching lesson, by the way. It's a great teaching moment to use his story as to what it means to be free, right? If you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, it's a short book. There's enough time to read it between now and Seder night. It's only a short book. Get hold of a copy on Amazon, get it delivered. Man's Search for Meaning. It's an incredibly powerful book, and it will you can use it in so many different ways at the Seder. Viktor Frankl says that we never lose our freedom to choose how we react to the circumstances we are in. No one can take that away from us. It makes no difference. The environment we're in, we have no power over whatsoever, but we always have the ability to choose our response. That is the essence of his entire message, throughout the whole book. Why do we say Metchila of the Avodah Zarah Hayavosenu? Because the greatest strength of our people was always moral, never physical. We were the ones who were able to turn away from the idols, even when our ancestors worshipped them, even when we knew that there were people who we were incredibly close to who had gone worshiping idols. You think it was so easy for Avraham Avinu that his own father had gone in a certain way and he had to choose a different direction? It was a decision of incredible moral strength. But it's the strength of our morality to make the right moral decisions that has always been our greatest strength. In the Kovno ghetto in the 1940s, there's a story of a chazan. And the chazan is davening from the Omid, and he's going through the brachos in the Birkas HaShachar. And he's in the ghetto, and he cannot bring himself to say the word Shalei Asani Oved. He can't do it. He can't say Shalei Asani Oved. I have a feeling, Rabbi Sachs might bring this in his Haggadah, perhaps, if I remember correctly, this story. Shalei Asani Oved. He can't say the word Shalei Asani Oved. It's not made me a servant, a slave. How can I say that? And he goes and asks the Rav for advice. And he turns around to him, he says, you need to say the bracha. You know why? Because they can take away our bodies, they can take away our freedom, but they will never, ever take away our souls. Even when we are in slavery, we await Hashem's redemption. Even when we're there, we have that ability, we have the moral strength, which we will never, ever lose. That was the moral strength that they felt in the Kovno ghetto that year. That was the moral strength they felt in Warsaw, the night of the uprising. A very brief quote, 19th of April, 1943. Tuvia Berezovsky was a member of the Jewish Fighting Organization. He describes the Seder in Rebbe Lezer Meisel's apartment. Amidst this destruction, the table in the center of the room looked incongruous, with glasses filled with wine, with the family seated around, the rabbi reading the Haggadah. His reading was punctuated by explosions and the rattling of machine guns. The faces of the family around the table were lit by the red light from the burning buildings nearby. The moral strength that takes to continue the Seder in that environment is the greatest strength we have as a people. That's why we say Metchila Ovdei Avodah Zarah, because you need to know where we came from and the moral strength we had to overcome. Short message number 2, Tzei Olamad. We say Tzei Olamad, Tzei Olamad. What do we do with Tzei Olamad? Tzei Olamad is very strange, because why on earth do we bring Lovan into the story? What is the purpose of bringing Lovan in? Yeah, this is a question which many ask. Why does it start from there? We have to make a whole chesh. The Gemara has to make a whole lomdisha distinction out of it. Because there's a whole explanation here. They have to go through as to why we're even mentioning him. Because Lovan, you think he's so good, but actually he wanted to uproot everything. Saw a beautiful idea from a Rav in America. I think his name is Tawitzer, or Taucher, I think. He says like this. He says that the one thing that Lavan does, which is so immensely dangerous, which we need to have in the Haggadah, we need to learn the lesson from, is that he plays his two daughters off against each other. He introduces some way that potential damage and danger of sibling rivalry into the Jewish people. If you look through, if you remember the story carefully enough, and you think about how Rachel and Leah are literally played off against each other for Lavan's own aims, and the potential for devastation and destruction in a family unit that comes as a result of that, putting Lavan in the Seder makes us realize how important it is to be aware of the danger of not splitting a family, of machlokas within a family. Too many times, every Rav will say this, one of the most painful things a Rav ever has to deal with is machlokas in a family. Within the family unit, siblings, when the Rebbetzin of when I grew up in Kingsbury, as many of you know, and when Rebbetzin Hall passed away, so she wrote an ethical will for her children, and the shiva, the will was present, and some of us who were at the shiva were able to see a copy of the will. I actually had I'm sure I keep it private. I had the presence of mind to actually take a picture of it because it was so moving and incredibly powerful. Baruch Hashem, Rabbi Hall is Kanain Hora is doing very well. We saw him recently. He should be gesund and stark. And he's Rebbetzin. That when she passed away, they presented this. This ethical will for her children was there. The thrust of the will was basically saying one thing. She said to her children, she said, "You know that we've done everything in our lives to avoid machlokas and lashon hara. Please make sure that you always stay together and you share in each other's simchas." It was a very short few lines. What does a parent want? That the children get on. They may be different. There may be differences. Not everyone's the same. One may go in that direction. One may go in this direction. But the fact is that look at the painful story of Lavan. Look at the way he plays his daughters off against each other. Look how damaging and devastating that is. We need to do all we can to avoid that happening. Let's bring our families together on Seder and never apart. Third brief idea. Vayogar Shom. Yaakov Avinu's arrival. Vayogar Shom, what do we say in the Haggadah? We say Vayogar Shom Melame. This teaches us Yaakov Avinu Ishtakev Mitzrayim Elalogur Shom. He didn't go to stay for long. He just went for a temporary sojourn, just for a short time. Think of it like this. So much of life is like that. It's the unintended, it is the unpredictable path. People sitting around your table, sitting around tables all over the place, Seder tables, are like Yaakov Avinu, searching for their own way in life. There are young people, children, teenagers, those older than teenagers, maybe even us as well. They're still like Yaakov Avinu. We're still searching, still looking for a path, still finding it difficult to settle down. People generally, as we know, are settling down so much later in life now. The phenomena of the kids coming back home, right? That's how it is. They go to university and they come back home. That's what it is. That's what it is. It just takes longer. It takes more time. So we need that message of reassurance that the story gives. The story of Yetzias Mitzrayim gives us a message of reassurance that sometimes it takes time to settle down. Yaakov Avinu has to go all the way down to Mitzrayim, and he's only there temporary. He doesn't even know how long he's going to be there for. Sometimes it takes time to settle down in life. It's not so simple. But we have a reassurance from the story of our people that we get there in the end. You'll find your own way. You'll find your own path. You'll find the ability to settle down. And that is something which, again, it's just a little brief idea to share with people around the table. Just that message. Yaakov Avinu, it took him a long time to settle down, but he did eventually manage to achieve that. So I'm going to share with you now one final piece, which I think will hopefully wrap up another idea which you can I hope that you can use at the Seder. But I think as it just personally speaks to me, and hopefully it will be something meaningful to you as well. The Mitzrayim, the notion of Mitzrayim itself. Mitzrayim is mentioned in the Torah no less than 244 times. Para is mentioned 184 times. There must be something which is so central about what Mitzrayim represents. What does it represent? That it has that merit of living there in the Torah and just appearing again and again and again and again. We have Paroi and Mitzrayim inside our tefillin. You know that they belong, and it's amazing, right? we stand there every morning davening. Jewish men stand there every morning davening, and right inside our tefillin are Paroi and Mitzrayim. They're living with us. They're there with us. What is it? What did they merit? What did they do to merit this position in our story? So there are those who suggest as follows. What was the first sin, the first chet? First chet, Adam Rishon. What did the Nachash do? The Nachash, the snake, the serpent in Gan Eden. Pasuk says in Bereshis, Gimel Pasuk Vav, Vatero Yeshaki Tov Eitz Lamachol. And the woman saw that the tree was good to eat. V'chisavahu lo einayim, and it was desirous to the eyes. V'nechmod ha'etz lahaskel. And the tree, the eitz, was nechmod. There was a desire there. There was a chemda for it in order to gain the intelligence, that the perception that this eating from this fruit would give. The idea of what the snake did was the snake was able to bring into Chava, and then from there to Adam Rishon, the idea of the imagination, we call Koach HaDimyon, the idea that you can shroud in a blanket the truth, and you can present something in a way that is simply completely removed from reality, but appears to be entirely real. The confusion of the emes, of the truth, is something which was brought into this world through that first chet, the idea of when they eat from the tree in Gan Eden. Sachmod is so damaging to desire something because it clouds our vision. When a person is jealous of something, when a person wants something else, they forget the emes, they forget what is really true, they forget everything. That's why it's in the Aseres HaDibros. It clouds all our vision entirely. Paroi is referred to in a number of places as a serpent. The Nachash features very, of course, in the story, right? The whole idea of the Nachash, Moshe Rabbeinu throwing the staff down and becoming a Nachash. The Novi describes Paroi as well as a Nachash, the great serpent. So you see this idea or the like. So you see the same thing. You see this idea of a Nachash passing through towards Paroi as well. Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen says that Mitzrayim is, the essence of Mitzrayim is this idea and the power of the imagination that we have as to what reality is, the clouding of our vision through an imagination that goes the wrong way, the demionis that we have, the imaginary ideas that we have that cloud us and cloud our clear thinking. Mitzrayim stands for Meitzar Yam, right? Meitzar is like the boundaries of the sea. It is the fact that there are boundaries, there are restrictions on the ability of real chokhmah, real wisdom and real emes to penetrate into the heart. And that is the danger of living a Mitzrayim existence, of living an existence which restricts us and prevents us from seeing clearly the truth in life. When everything looks like Teva, everything looks like the natural world, there's nothing beyond. Everything we see, we look at what we see around us and we think this is the reality. There's nothing beyond that. There's no spirituality beyond that. It prevents us achieving what we can achieve in life, achieving the best things we can, being the best people we can be in life, and above all, connecting to the truth of the Torah and the truth of our inheritance. I'll tell you a brief story. You may not know this, but the story of Beethoven is a fascinating one. In 1801, right, Ludwig van Beethoven is 30 years old. And he complained at that young age about his diminishing hearing. From a distance, he said, "I do not hear the high notes of the instruments and the singers' voices." Beethoven was furious about his decline, furious. And he insisted on continuing to perform. He used to pound the pianos in a vain attempt somehow to hear his own notes, but he didn't help. And by the age of 45, he was completely deaf. But then something very, very strange happened in Beethoven's story. He was cut off from the world of sound around him. And he's a musician, he's composing music. He cannot hear sound. He's working only with musical structures which go through his imagination. He holds a pencil in his mouth at times against the piano's soundboard so he can feel the consonants of the chords. And yet, it's at that stage in his life that Beethoven produces the very best music of his career. He creates during that period the Ninth Symphony, music that is considered to have basically reinvented classical music. And it's a mystery. People wonder, well, how can it be that his most original and brilliant compositions as a composer are in inverse proportion to his ability to hear? There's a book written, I believe it's either a book or it's an article written by someone called Arthur C. Brooks. He wrote a piece in the Washington Post about this, and he says like this: the research shows like this, that what Beethoven's diminished hearing did is it limited the influence of everyone else on him. His earlier works were influenced heavily by others, by his instructors, by other people, but his later work is completely innovative. Why? See, Brooks puts it in a beautiful phrase. He says, deafness freed Beethoven as a composer because he no longer had society's soundtrack in his ears. That's the paradox. Says Carl Newport, who's written a lot about this idea about needing to find space from the noise of society. He says like this, that in the lives that we live at the moment, he calls it our current techno-cultural moment. We connected to a humming online hive mind of takes and urgency and influence. We are told all the time that we need to be connected to everything all the time. And the reality is sometimes if we can take a moment to remove the soundtrack of society from our ears, even if that absence seems acute, you can sometimes really hear yourself. You can really hear yourself. Turning the volume down on everyone else allows us to really hear, to really listen inside. That really is what is going on with the distinction with Yetzias Mitzrayim, with leaving Mitzrayim. The pathway out of that koach hadimyon, the pathway out of the false imagination that we have, that Mitzrayim represents, that we're bounded, we're limited, we can't go beyond what we see in front of us, that we can't go beyond what the way we think and see the world to be. The freedom from society's soundtrack lies in the ability to realize that we can break free from that if we can connect to what it means to be Jewish, what it means to have a faith, what our faith means to us. And that, I think, is why we move on from Avodim Hayinu L'Faru B'Mitzrayim, we go through Ma'aser Belez, etc., and then we get to Baruch HaMokem Baruch Hu, and we say Baruch Shenosan Torah L'Amei Yisrael. And that we introduce the Arba Bonim, people they will struggle with this. Why is that an introduction to the Arba Bonim? What's the connection? What's going on? Because at the end of the day, there are those who go through life thinking that the Torah is an intellectual exercise, that to really connect to learning Torah, or to really connect to the messages at all of the Torah, you've got to be on a level. You've got to be on a certain level. And if you're not on that level, if you haven't been to yeshiva, you haven't got that, then you can't connect. It's not really for you. A little snippet you think you can hear. I can hear bits and pieces I might be able to connect to. The whole message of the Haggadah is that is so wrong, that is so false. Avodim hayinu l'fara b'Mitzrayim. We want to live a Mitzrayim life, then we stay as slaves. If we live a life that we see as limited, that it's based on those imaginary ideas that we have in our head, that we can't grow, that we can't go beyond what we see and what we think we are and everything else, then we're stuck. But once we say Baruch HaMokem Baruch Hu, we don't say Baruch Shenosan Torah to the clever ones. We say Baruch Shenosan Torah to Amei Yisrael. Hashem gave the Torah to all of us. Keneged Arba Bonim Dibra Torah. The Torah talks about everyone. The Torah is not there for a few people. It's not there for only men or women or whatever. It's for everyone. It's for every single member of Klal Yisrael. Means that being marbel saper, through talking more, through understanding fully Yetzias Mitzrayim, harizeh meshubach. What does it mean, harizeh meshubach? That's how you become meshubach. You change. We become changed people. The final piece of this, and with this we'll conclude. We know that we in the Haggadah we say Shaila Tshuva, right? Question and answer. That's the whole structure of the Haggadah. You ask yourself why. Why do we have to? What does it mean? A question. Rav Wolbe says in Alei Shur the most beautiful, beautiful idea. He brings a posuk about the early days of when David HaMelech is first discovered in Sefer Shmuel. Vayan echad me'ana orim, and one of the lads answered, Vayomer, and he said, Hinei ro'isi ben leYishai beis halachmi. I see a son to Yishai, beis halachmi beis lechem. Yodea nagain, he knows how to play, right? He knows how to play the kinar, v'gibor chayil, and he's a mighty warrior. Says the Gemara, what is those two phrases, Yodea nagain and gibor? Yodea nagain means yodea lishol. He knows how to ask, Yodea lishol. And gibor mighty means sheyodea lahoshiv. He knows how to answer. That's what it means. Yodea lenagain, to know how to play an instrument, is one who knows how to ask. And Gibor Mighty is one who knows how to answer. Says Rav Wolbe, what does playing an instrument have to do? What does negina, what does a niggun have to do with one who knows how to ask? He says, negina, his orus nafshis. It's to awaken the soul. That's what a good niggun does. We've all felt that. You hear that good niggun, that beautiful singing. What do you hear? It changes you. It uplifts you. It transforms you. His orus nafshis. It uplifts the soul. V'zoi gamken, he says, inyan hayadir lishol. That's what it means. The idea of knowing how to ask. If you're asking a question, you must have had some internal uplifting, awakening. There's something which has prompted you to ask a question. That is why we approach the Haggadah with Sheila Tshuva, with asking and with questioning and answering, because we want to be redeemed on this night. And the Geula begins with one thing. The Geula starts and ends with his orus nafshis, with simply being open, ourselves being open to uplift ourselves, to awaken ourselves, to rise up out of the slumber that we're in. That is the potential and power of Leil HaSeder. That's how we say Asah Hashem Li. That's how we leave Mitzrayim. We leave Mitzrayim through asking questions, because you ask questions, you're already awake, you're there, you're with it, you're in the moment. So what we've done this evening is just really gone through some ideas which hopefully you'll be able to use in some way with your own Sedarim. Just to very, very briefly recap, we began with the idea of Seder, the fact that this is an evening of order. This is an evening of order. It's the opposite of order, but we have to find the order in the Seder. That's the idea. We have to take what it seems extraordinary and make it part of our lives, bring it down to this world. And we talked about the fact that we were a year on, right? We're a year on. The Seder begins with a year. Lashana haba, b'nei chorin, everything is about a year, but a year can mean repetition or it can mean change. How do you make the year mean change? Because you take your halachmo anya, you take the poor man's bread, and you say, Kol dichvin yesiv v'yechel. Anyone who wants to, let them come and eat. I'm looking out for someone else. That makes your year change. It means the year is not a repetition, but it is real change. And we said that also links to the idea that we begin the Seder this year with Havdalah, not just Kiddush, because Havdalah is about understanding that from the darkness we can create light, just as Odom Arishan did, just as Odom Arishan created light. That is what we will do at the Seder this year. This year we will find Or from the Choshech. We will take the Choshech, the broken pieces of Luchos of the past year, and we will create that light. That's how we will change this year. We said 3 short ideas to use in the Seder. We said, Metchila Ovde Avodah Zorah, the idea that, why do we begin with saying that the beginning was they were idol worshippers? Because the greatest strength we had of the greatest strength of our people was always moral. The ability to say, yes, we did worship idols, but we turned away from it. We had the strength to overcome. So we can still say, Shelo Yasani Oved, even if we are in slavery, we feel enslaved, as that Chazan did, it was told to do in the Kovno ghetto. We can still say those words because we will always have the ability to break free. We always have that moral strength. Seolamad, we said. What is Seolamad? The idea is Lovon does so much damage through playing his own children off against each other. Always let's try and avoid everything we can. Anything that might divide a family, let's keep our families together. Let's share that message at the Seder. Vayogor Shom, Yaakov Avinu's arrival is temporary, only means to be there for a brief moment. It takes an awfully long time. He's quite a late stage in his life for some temporary sojourning. Share that message around the table. It takes time to get there. It's not easy. People often feel they're in a temporary stage all the time. They're not quite there, never quite there. It's okay. You're in good company. Yaakov Avinu was also like that. You'll get there eventually, just as he did. And finally, Mitzrayim represents the power of the imagination and the way it can trick us and the way it can think, the koach hadimyon. We think that this is where we are. We're limited. That's all we have. There's nothing we can break through. We can't go beyond that. But remember, as we learn from that story of Beethoven, that sometimes there are moments of freedom we can find from the soundtrack of society around us. When we find those moments of freedom, when we can break free from the soundtrack of society, when we can connect to Baruch Shenosan Torah L'Am Yisrael, that we have a Torah which each and every one of us can connect to. It's L'Am Yisrael, it's to all of us. It's not to some people and not others. It's to the Arba Bonim, it's to all of us in our entirety. When we do that, we have the ability, as Rav Wolbe says, to really ask, She'elo Tshuva, his Oros Nafshis, to wake ourselves up inside, like David HaMelech, who's Yodeh L'Nagein. He knows how to play, he knows how to sing, because someone who knows how to sing has been awakened inside, some spiritual stirring. When we do that in the Haggadah, through She'elo Tshuva, we do the same thing ourselves. It's our tefillah that this year in Mitzvah Hashem, we should be Zocha to the Geula Shalema, the real Geula Asher Go'alonu. We're going to say there, Kein Yagi'enu. We're going to daven that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bring us to times of tremendous simcha. That is what we all hope for this year, that we should come together in person. We should together dance and sing. We should be Yodeh L'Nagein in the best possible way, as a kehillah, as families, as individuals, together as one. And I wish you all a kosher and Pesach, a Chag kosher Samech, and thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Birnbaum. Fantastic.
Mm.